Venezuela is in its fifth year of recession. The country's president, Nicolas Maduro, came to power in 2013. Around 120 people were killed during 2017 in anti-government protests. The International Monetary Fund forecasts that inflation will hit 13,000% by the end of this year. Most Venezuelans crossing the Simón Bolívar Bridge are fleeing their country for food and medicine. Cucuta is the principal border point into Colombia, with up to 40,000 people passing every day. This lady has arrived with acute appendicitis. She has made it just in time. Many stories don't end this well. On the Venezuelan side of the border, crumbling hospitals are at breaking point. In mid-2017, the Red Cross, funded by the EU Humanitarian Aid Office, set up a reception facility next to the bridge in a bid to alleviate a crisis it says has largely been ignored.
The Red Cross has been opening and closing this post every morning and night as a way to raise our hand and say, something is happening here and we need to draw attention to this. It's an invisible crisis on both sides.
Invisible de los dos lados.
3 nurses and a doctor are always on duty in the first aid tent. Many people come with chronic diseases that need simple, cheap medicine, which is no longer available in Venezuela. There are also cancer patients desperate to restart treatment, as well as the malnourished.
We are providing assistance to a person who fainted. We brought him here and it looks like he's suffering from malnutrition. Every day we treat 5 or 6 cases of malnutrition.
The Red Cross post is located next to the migration office, where over 3,000 migrants queue daily to have their passports stamped. Many have taken days to cross the border. Getting in touch with their families is a priority.
The Colombian Red Cross offers a family contact service. You can come by and connect to the internet. The first thing was charging the phone to call our family. We haven't heard from them for 4 days. The guards on the Venezuelan side are charging $10 per person to stamp the passport. If you don't have it, the queue lasts for days and days and days. This has to be done for free. You cannot charge for it.
Faced with this massive influx of migrants, Colombia has called for international help. The EU's Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid recently visited Cucuta. He announced Europe would be providing €2 million to Venezuela and $6 million to Colombia.
Does Colombia have the means to face this crisis, and how can the EU help?
For Colombian authorities, it's a huge challenge to deal with this unprecedented situation. They face also their challenges in their country about the reconciliation process and peace process. So our humanitarian aid is going in both sides, inside Venezuela and inside Colombia. Especially in Venezuela, we are trying a lot in order to find ways to provide, in particular, medicines and to find projects to deal with acute malnutrition.
Venezuelan families are constantly settling in Cucuta. Illegal migrants with no documents are moving into the city's deprived neighbourhoods. The Norwegian Refugee Council, with EU aid, is organising activities for 500 children not in school. The aim is to get them back into the classroom.
Children can now have access to the schools, but their right to enrol doesn't mean they'll be able to study. That's because many of these children live irregularly in the country. Their parents have no documents enabling access to any kind of legal right inside Colombia. What does this mean? It means, for example, that these kids don't receive any certificate when they finish the school year.
Some 4,100 Venezuelan pupils are registered at school in the department of Norte de Santander. Adriana's daughters are among them. The family settled illegally in Cucuta 3 years ago. In Venezuela, Adriana was a nurse and says she had a normal life. Her daughters and nephew had to wait 1 year before they could go to school.
The children are managing to study regularly in terms of their documents, but financially it's not normal. It's not easy to maintain 3 children at school when you're a foreigner without documents. If you manage to get food, how is it possible to buy items like school uniforms, shoes? That's very difficult.
It's estimated that 230,000 illegal migrants live in Cucuta. The UNHCR is working with the government to try to register them and improve their conditions both on arrival and long term. Up to 45,000 migrants cross on foot from Venezuela to Cucuta every day. The Colombian city has become the last hope for many fleeing Venezuela's crumbling economy.
Back there's no food, you can't find anything. There are no medicines. We had to come here to vaccinate the baby.
At home, we only have electricity for 2 hours a day. We have water from 1 to 3 hours every 2 days. There's no gas.
It's a challenge to be able to get everyone in our family to sit at the table and have a meal at least once a day.
You can't live on 700 to 1,000 bolivars every 2 weeks. You can't live even if you earn 2 million bolivars in 2 weeks. You can't live on that.
Now in its 5th year of recession, critics blame both the government and corruption in Venezuela for the country's crippling economic crisis. Last year, inflation topped 2,600%. This year, the IMF expects it to hit 13,000%. In March, President Nicolas Maduro announced plans to change the face value of the country's bolivar currency, knocking 3 zeros off.
It is much cheaper here, and you can get anything. You can find mayonnaise, toilet paper, the essential things needed to feel human. There's no toilet paper or napkins back home. How is it possible that 1 litre of petrol costs 1 bolivar and 1 litre of water costs 5,000? For the love of God!
The bridge from Venezuela to Cucuta is the main border point between the 2 Latin American neighbours. Scores of small businesses have sprung up, from stalls offering to buy hair to wheelchair taxi services, proof of people's ingenuity in the face of extreme adversity.
This is a symbol of an economy in freefall, when 1 bag made out of bolivars is worth more than the banknotes themselves.
One of these bags would buy just a packet of salt in Venezuela, but sold in Colombia, it has the potential to provide this family of 3 with food for a week.
We started making hearts, making airplanes with banknotes. For me, this is an art, because in reality, with this money, I cannot buy anything in Venezuela. You have to have a huge amount of this cash to buy what you need.
It's estimated more than 1 million Venezuelans have settled in Colombia. On arrival, at least, they are not considered refugees. But irrespective of whether those fleeing want to live in Colombia or simply use it as a gateway elsewhere, first they need to be allowed in.
In order to enter Colombia, they need a passport. There are people who manage to get the border mobility card, which is a temporary permit. In addition to that, about a year ago, Colombia created a special visa, which is another way of establishing yourself once you are already in the country. To obtain it, you must have entered Colombia regularly with your passport stamped.
To stem the flow of migrants from Venezuela, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos recently announced an end to the border mobility card scheme. The temporary visas were the most common documents used by poor Venezuelans, given the difficulty of obtaining a passport.
You cannot get a passport. You can get one if you pay. They were asking for around 10 million bolivars. A salary is about 400,000 to 500,000 bolivars. This means 500,000 bolivars, and we're talking 10 million. That's more than 1 year's salary to pay for a passport.
With neither the correct documents or the right to work, thousands of Venezuelans who once held decent jobs at home have been reduced to begging for food and small change in Cucuta. At one shelter run by the Catholic Church, they distribute more than 1,000 free meals a day. Some just cross the bridge for the food.
The situation is horrible. We come here because in San Cristobal there is no food. I worked at the town hall of San Cristobal, but the money wasn't enough to eat.
Others cross the border in the hope of finding any sort of job to send money back home. Many families have been split apart.
Venezuela's a country which makes me deeply sad, because I've left my 3 children behind in order to come here and find a job to send them some money. What would I do if I brought them here? Where would I keep them? I couldn't keep them on the street.
Where are you going to sleep tonight?
I don't know. Perhaps in the street. Wherever I can find.
The epicenter of Venezuela's migrant exodus in Colombia is in the historically volatile region of Norte de Santander. Armed groups still control vast swathes here despite a peace deal with FARC in 2016. That officially ended the 52-year conflict, but many of Colombia's internally displaced now live in Cucuta's poorest districts.
Since August, the number of Venezuelan migrants entering Cúcuta's most vulnerable neighbourhoods has risen from 0 to 3,000.
Church missionaries who work in the city's poorest areas say the migrants run a huge risk of exploitation.
This massive influx of Venezuelans, many of whom are trained professionals, has obviously presented a big opportunity for dishonest employers. They can make half promises, pay badly, or not even pay them at all. The migrants can also be recruited and sent somewhere. They can be asked to harvest coffee or even coca leaves.
Faced with this massive influx, Colombia has called for international help. The EU's chief for humanitarian aid recently met President Santos and also visited Cucuta for himself. During the visit, he announced Europe would be providing an additional 31 million euros in funding, 2 million of which will go to Venezuela and 6 million to Colombia.
For Colombian authorities, it's a huge challenge to deal with this unprecedented situation. But because, of course, they face also their challenges in their country about the reconciliation process and peace process. So our humanitarian aid is going in both sides, inside Venezuela and inside Colombia. Especially in Venezuela, we are trying a lot in order to find ways to provide, in particular, medicines and to find projects to deal with acute malnutrition.
International aid agencies are also working with the Colombian government to provide more shelter for the migrants. But President Santos has been heavily criticised over Colombia's efforts to stem the migrant flow. The head of one migration centre believes Bogotá's stricter policy will backfire by actually increasing the number of illegal entries.
The measures taken by the government are effectively a diplomatic closure of the border. Now Venezuelans need a passport or a special permit to enter. Everything is much more complex. The alternative for migrants is to go via illegal entry points. Everyone knows there are criminal groups acting outside the law. This puts the migrants' welfare at risk.
Since February, the authorities in Colombia claim migrant numbers have dropped by more than 30%. They also say nearly 1,500 people have been repatriated. The Venezuelans we spoke to branded the new measures as deportations. One young man forced onto the street was among them, despite having a passport.
As a Venezuelan citizen, when I arrive in another country, I know there are laws that must be observed. I'm working and looking for a legal way to earn a living and get by every day. You cannot evict me from the country, and even less to take the merchandise as they have done. In Venezuela, there are 6 million Colombians that make a living there and still do very well. But when I come here, they want to throw me out. Why? Where's the justice in that? What did Bolivar want? A united nation? There is xenophobia in Colombia. There is xenophobia because we're Venezuelans.
Cucuta looks like a city that's been hit by a natural disaster, the disaster that is Venezuela. Its roots are economic and political. It has left its people with few choices.
Cucuta, Euronews.
Colombia has been invaded by Venezuelans desperate to buy much-needed food and medicine and basic goods like toilet paper and soap. An estimated 35,000 took advantage of a 12-hour temporary border opening. A severe economic crisis following a decline in oil revenues has caused critical shortages in their country. This woman said, "I was crying as I crossed the bridge when I saw the avalanche of people. It's unbelievable to me that all of Venezuela wants to come here to this neighboring country to look for the things we can't get over there. Every day there are fewer things." Shelves emptied swiftly on the Colombian side of the border, where shops accepted the depreciating Venezuelan currency, the bolivar. This cross-border shopper said it's a relief to be able to come here to find our products, our medicines that we can't really get over there. We don't have food, we don't have cooking oil, we don't have flour. That's why we have to come here. Critics blame Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's economic policies for the shortages, which got worse as oil prices fell. He ordered the border closed 11 months ago to crack down on smuggling and following an attack on a customs post by former Colombian anti-government fighters.